I kept hearing these stories about one, the war, but then two, like he was just a fighter around town and he was, but I was like, how could that be the same person? And him talking about like, yeah, I don't like that was part of me, but that was part of me and I have to face the consequences. You'd say like that person doesn't talk to me anymore because he remembers who I used to be. And so for me, it it definitely created a mindset that it's like, hey, you don't have to be stuck.
In a world that often pulls us apart, More in Common brings us back to what matters. Hosted by Gerren Taylor and Keith Richardson, this isn't your average podcast. It's a challenge to think deeper, question louder, and grow further. At More in Common, we work with NFL teams, tech companies, and professionals across industries to improve communication and foster compassion. And with a focus on emotional intelligence, we aim to bring a wealth of experience to help you navigate the complexities of human connection. We've never been more connected and yet more isolated. We want to explore the roots of that tension and offer a way back to what we all need: real human connection. Enjoy the show.
In fact, I was watching this interview, the 50 Cent on Good Morning America, but he's on this publicity tour, or was on this publicity tour for the documentary about Diddy that he's got on Netflix. And the just cold smile, because they've got beef, it's long, but like he's smiling through every answer like that, just the worst villain on earth. And it's part of that same kind of code switching thing, right? Like you just, even though he really wants to say some nasty stuff, he's like, I think Diddy's gonna enjoy this documentary. I think he's gonna think it's well made. He's gonna think it's one of the
all things. I feel like code switching is so much like what sociologists often call like impression management, right? Like life is a game. It's all dramaturgy. It's all about a stage. And so like we're just in impression management mode. And in so many respects, that's what code switching is like, hey, we know the loose rules of this context. We know our role. We know what kind of scripts and props we need to be able to participate. And that's part of, being able to lie through an interview and present your best self, or to present your best masculine self in the conversation we're having.
Or make it out of the hood unscathed, depending on what you got going on.
Man, you just teed up this episode. Oh, I'm excited.
Well, let's do the intro, because this is the More
dive into it.
Yeah, so good.
I'm Gerren Taylor. That's Keith Richardson. The guests this week again is our man Nicholas Miller, the tenured sociology professor, facilitator, and system change strategist with over 2 decades of experience advancing equity, inclusion, and leadership across education. He's a full-time faculty member at Sacramento City College. He's got a lot of bio. We're going to let you guys go back to episode 1 if you don't know who he is. But he's awesome, and he's joining us to continue our conversation.
By the way, if you ever want to hear a good use of ChatGPT and large language models, the synthesizing of that bio from last week into that moment that Gerren just read off there, that was brilliant. Nice use.
That was me, GPT, motherfucker.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I love that he's a ChatGPT brain, and I was gonna say, after, if he was gonna read the whole thing, I was like, oh my god, I wish you had told me to just reduce it down. If I was gonna have to listen to it multiple times, I was gonna say, like, next time.
No,
like,
that was my super quick brain edit. Reading the same topic.
That was a tremendous power of the brain that I thought it was AI.
Yeah. Well, I felt like after I knew you, after I'd sent that off to you, I was like, I know these guys, and they're gonna like make fun of it when it's going out.
Maybe in private.
There's nothing to make fun of.
No.
This is a good thing I think about masculinity that we should talk about as we continue this episode too, right? Because a lot of our male friends, instead of being like, bro, I love you, they're like, they talk shit about you. You know what I mean? Like, it's our way of showing affection often in male groups is talking the roughest, saying things that you would not say to them in public, kind of, you know what I mean? But sometimes, you do dope shit, bro. Like,
I
and
feel the love when you're
you're hard.
harassing. I feel it.
That's it. The social power of teasing, in what it actually is. But that aside, like, you lead into this conversation with what you were just talking about, and coming out of it, like, for those who haven't tuned in to the first episode, we really talked about the history of study of masculinity, which really doesn't go that far, and just navigating the roles of the definition of what a man is in society and the economic impacts that really is anchored on. So when we think about the loneliness epidemic, we think about the lack of access to provide based on the definitions of the roles that we continue to move forward with based on past experience, because generational influence. It makes me, like, really want to explore what's the negative impact to this lack of clarity. We talk about code switching. So we you teed it up, right? Like, we generally know what props we need. Well, it's like we're super unclear about those things now. We have access to so many people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different exposure. If you're a man and I've never met you before, look, I'm super vulnerable and we can have an emotional conversation, we can hug, and it's the first time we've met. You might not see me that way, but that's the experience that I'm hoping I can deliver for you. But not everybody, you just don't know where you are, and we're always trying to navigate these spaces. And just this idea really seems to me it has a significantly negative impact on the ability to build formative social connections that would be the solution to the loneliness epidemic, to the solution to fathers. I mean, I know of 2 fathers in the last year with young children who have committed suicide because they don't have social connection outside of their nuclear family dynamic. So I'm curious to get your take on that from a sociological standpoint, a macro point of view, and really explore that, because I think, as we look at the manosphere, here's my ramble. I didn't do it last week. I'm doing it this week.
Are you sure you didn't do it last week?
Man, I don't know. I'll listen to the
Some of us
episode.
may
I'll tell you then.
differ, Keith.
Here's that ribbing, good old ribbing. We think about the nature of social isolation and the over need to define people, and people don't feel that way about themselves, and so they're confused, and then we don't have a good solution to the manosphere that's out there, the Jordan Petersons of the world, the Joe Rogans of the world, that are saying you have to do it this way, and then people are just trying to figure it out. Like, I would love to be the solution to that, because it's such a diaspora of what that looks like. So now I'll shut up without an actual question mark at the end of it.
What to say? What's that?
Well, first of all, I think that you always present yourself in a huggable way, going back to something you said,
Yeah.
3 to 5 minutes ago in your little
Ouch! I didn't expect this.
I've been holding that in, or something, and I'm saying you do, Keith.
Thank you.
There's so many things that you just brought up, but one thing that it was triggering in me was possibly why I may have ended up going into sociology in the first place was growing up as a boy, right, in Idaho. I grew up in southeastern Idaho in a super small town. I had a small and large family, like one of those families where there was it was a divorced family. So I had, a dad, and then a stepdad, and then an ex-stepdad, and then a new stepdad, and I had step siblings and a variety of things, like a lot of kids in the 80s with their, you know, divorced parents and having multiple siblings and all of that. So, so I grew up in a rural area, and I grew up with a group of siblings, right? I had one brother I lived with, and then I had two stepbrothers and a stepsister that lived really close. My family was weird. Like, my dad bought a house on the opposite side of the block. So, like, there was an alleyway on the town block that separated the two houses, and we would just kind of go back and forth. But so I had these siblings, and my brother was like the football star, and then my two stepbrothers were athletes. My stepsister was, the head cheerleader. Um, I was the youngest of all of them, and I was looking at all of them as like, how am I supposed to show up? How do I show up and compete when I'm not athletic? Like, I tried like soccer as a kid and t-ball, and I was like kind of the squat chubby kid who got a lot of effort cheering, but I couldn't fit in, and I really struggled with that. I decided I became best friends with my grandpa, and would go out to coffee with the old boys, and I was included there, but I like really, and I was just listening and paying attention to like what kind of masculinity were they presenting,
Mm-hmm.
and they were so caring and kind, but they probably weren't when they were young, and then when they were out dealing with their buddies. Um, but so anyway, like I was trying to live up to like these siblings I had. And then I was witnessing this masculinity of like my grandpa who fought in World War II, who joined when he was 17 and lied about his age. And then, was a prisoner of war and then escaped and hiked across Poland to catch an English ship in the Black Sea. Right. And I'm like, how do I live up to that? And then having like, a dad and then a stepdad who became an ex stepdad and then a new stepdad, and they all performed masculinity differently. Like, one was an engineer who would go fishing on the weekends. Another one was, like work for the state, but then would like go hunting, and he was like big footballer. And then another one who was just kind of like, he was a teacher and a party animal and a gun enthusiast, but he would go shoot like target shooting versus like hunting. And I'm like, where do I fit in any of this? So my point being, like, I grew up going, how do I even fit in? So, I was a kid in the 90s and was like, grunge was a thing. And so I grew my hair out.
Green Day, Nirvana.
When I went through my stage in 8th, 9th grade when I lost a bunch of weight. And so I wasn't like the chubby kid anymore, but I was able to grow my hair out, dye it blonde. And I was like Kurt Cobain masculine. Right. And like, that's how I played. And, my grandpa's friends would sometimes see us in the car and they'd be like, who was that girlfriend? Did you have a girlfriend? Because he would see some girl. Or I'd be like at school and somebody would be like, come up to me thinking I was a girl. And so like it would really fuck with my masculinity and like my sense of who I am. I felt like I had finally found a masculine role that like fit with me of being like the long hair grungy dude who could headbang. But then sometimes I was challenged in it, right? And so like this was my long diatribe of like personal experience to get at like,
great.
it was all about performance for me and trying to live up to all these ideals.
I think that's number one, is that you, from the vantage point, you were able to not only amalgamate a sense of masculinity that you wanted, but you got to see different people performing it in different ways. And like that automatically makes you go, okay, so it gives you a permission, so to speak, to define your own masculinity, your own manhood through the examples. And you can take a little bit from here and take a little bit from there and take a little bit from there. And like, the interesting too is that being grounded in sort of that elder leadership from your granddad is a lot of things that I think people miss nowadays, like the value of mentorship from people who are not exactly in their exact peer group, but from seeing examples from older men. And I think that is something that helps because it allows you to reframe certain values, right? So like, instead of seeing strength as aggression, you saw him being kind to his friends now. And like you said, maybe he wasn't always like that, but you also saw his warrior ass, like XPOW, and that strength is different, right? Or you see leadership differently, right? You see it as responsibility as opposed to control, or protection as opposed to dominance. It's really about being present and supporting the people in your group, and confidence in not being overly egocentric or domineering, but really just about being your own trust in self, and ability to project that to others. So I think those core reframes about masculinity are part of how I hear you experiencing it in some ways, but also what I think people can do in their own lives to think about how they see masculine. To me, like, not to bring it back to Diddy, but like those things, we're gonna bring it
It
back
all
to
goes
Diddy.
back to Diddy.
But those things are exactly what I see in the dynamic of those relationships. The presentation of masculinity in these domineering, all about me, ego controlling fashions when it comes to the kids or his partners or even his artists. Those frameworks of masculinity are not what he chose. He chose the, you know what I mean, he chose the like darker forms of those, and we all have our opportunity. And to your point, that grunge period was the transformative moment for you as you start to really test this masculinity out in the world. I'm interesting for you, Keith, as I see you chewing on your finger. Like, what are you thinking about in that transition to from, especially in adolescence? I think you start to manifest a lot of what your masculine traits are.
The first thing I think is a question. I have some thoughts. I'm curious, Nick, as Gerren goes through so eloquently the positive potential for having that big of a, a breadth, and you framed it in such a way. It's like it's confusing, right? It is confusing. Um, what how did you work through it? Like you said at the very top of it, then maybe that's why I got into sociology, so I can intellectually explore it. So I'm curious, like how you worked through that um
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
time.
I do think that was part of it, right? Like, and to one of Garrett's points was like I witnessed my grandpa who seemed like this super kind. I mean, he was the super kind man, but I kept hearing these stories about one, the war, but then two, like he was just a fighter around town, and he was. But I was like, how could that be the same person? And him talking about like, yeah, I don't like that was part of me, but that was part of me, and I have to face the consequences. You'd say like that person doesn't talk to me anymore because he remembers who I used to be, and so for me, it it definitely created a mindset that it's like, hey, you don't have to be stuck. It isn't inherently natural. It's not essential to who he was. He recognized his flaws as a father, where he was like, I made my whole life about providing money. He owned a gas station, a service station, and he worked, from 6 in the morning or whatever till 10 p.m. And he's like, I missed out on raising my daughter, and like, don't ever do that. I was like, wow, okay. So I really tried to hear that and hear what the other men in my life were saying. But definitely, I felt like I didn't know how to fit in. And I found one thing where I could like pass and and be grungy cool in the 90s, wear my flannels. But then I went to college and was able to find like academic disciplines that, like explored power. And that's why I think it resonated to me, because I felt not super powerful, even though I was a white male. I didn't feel powerful at all in it. I felt like kind of the outcast, um, coming from a dominant Mormon community, and I wasn't Mormon. Was figuring out I was bisexual and not heterosexual in a very, very heteronormative society and community and culture. And so I didn't know where I fit, but being able to find like spaces where people were talking about power and how like ideas are constructed and how they can shift, how they're culturally variable, how like you can look at societies across the world and see that there's different expressions of masculinity. You can see how masculinity has changed over time, similar with femininity, and now see how it plays out in our daily life. And so I was able to find sociology and political science to help me. And I think it was a way for me to process what I was up to. I didn't really go into gender studies. I kind of went into like politics and environmental politics because maybe it was too deeply personal and close to me. It wasn't until grad school where I kind of dove into it. But one of my buddies in undergrad, we had to do a thesis in our undergrad. And so one of her theses, because she was in honors and I wasn't, um, hers was on looking at drag king culture. And we would go out because we loved going to the drag shows in Portland because, a rural Idaho kid and she was from Wyoming. We're like, what is all of this out here in the city? The
Culture.
culture. We thought drag queens were like such fun shows to go to in a celebration of culture and community and feeling at people coming together and just being loved. Um, but watching drag kings where females were dressing up in a variety of forms of masculinity was fascinating. And while I wasn't studying it for myself, I was going to the shows and studying, I was her research assistant who was drinking on the side while she didn't. But I was witnessing how masculinity could be done by females in so many different forms.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that. And then when I got into grad school, like I'd just been studying power and kind of fell into the study of family and fatherhood. And maybe that was connected to, my experiences with like this important grandfather in my life, as well as, these influential fathers and stepfathers in my life. But studying fatherhood is where I was like, whoa, okay, like let's dive into what's happening with family. Let's figure out what's going on with fatherhood. And I wasn't even a father, but I just kind of took it into a discipline, but it definitely helped me think, hey, here's the sanctions that come from not living up to the ideals and roles of society. But then here's all the possibility, um, where we can go out and like manifest uh, safety for one another if we go out and express our true selves in a variety of ways.
To tie it back to
There-
some of the things that we were talking about in the first week, like I do agree with Galloway and some of the suggestions he makes around what men should be doing in this time and space, and it is going out more and making community, and like you said, you're the research assistant with the assistant drinker, but like go out, meet.
I was just
I all the time.
partying.
You need to go outside. You need to go outside and experience real people in real life, because not only is just being inside and taking in all the same information from your social media bubbles or whatever those things are, all those shame is not a growth strategy, right? So like if you're taking it out on yourself, if you're just in your house all the time talking about woe is me, it's not going to get better like just doing that. So you have to go out and experience something. But I also think that from what you're saying, that you literally get to explore and see things, and your brain goes, "Oh snap! I didn't know that drag kings could be so awesome." Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is this tingly feeling? Like, but that's where we explore, and it allows you to say yes, no, maybe. If you don't have a positive definition for masculinity, that's where it gets filled in by influencers and algorithms and shucksters, and you know I was telling Keith before he came on, like, I appreciate people having conversations for exploration, but like, if you don't know what you're talking about, like, have that conversation in private first and then go on air about it. Like, I was watching this podcast and these guys are talking about, what the difference between federal crimes there are and who can pardon. And it was just clear to me that none of the four hosts had any idea about what they're talking about. And I'm like, you know how dangerous it is to be on like, a nationally syndicated, widely absorbed podcast just pulling stuff out of your butt like that? Like, come on, guys. You can do better. It's just a thought.
there's oh my God, the two of you have just dropped so much unbelievable information relative to the impact that even like it's almost like you can't oversimplify it, but you need to oversimplify it because we need the boundaries so we know how we can walk about the world in a safe and meaningful way in order to, at the end of the day, and I say this in every episode, I didn't say it last week, to survive. We want what our basic human instinct is to procreate and survive our genes. Like it's animalistic in every aspect of it. So how do we know to court? Where do we spend time? I think you were given a gift, and I totally understand the confusion of it. Like as you were sharing that story, it was bringing me back to my childhood, where I had a nickname called as Julia, like Julia Roberts, because of my eyes. People used to ask me if I wore mascara, right? And I went through this like whole and I didn't have any, we'll say, traditionally masculine role models at all really in my life. I had my uncle, and that kind of was like go to the, my gym mentor, but it was this weird space of trying to figure that very same thing out as where do I fit? And how do I play and where do I want to be? And I've been gifted some things that allow me in particular to navigate that and come out on the end that I'm at now, but so many aren't. And by anchoring in this absolute definition, whatever your definition may be, is alienating, and it impacts the ability for people to connect. This creates issue with loneliness. It creates issue with isolation because it's hard enough as an adult to make friends, especially after you've had kids, let alone if that group of guys that you just happen to get along with, because the entire social, like, this is the thing that's coming to my mind constantly that I've picked up from this conversation. I love this conversation because I'm learning so much. Is the economic structures that are both propping up a particular social organization or suppressing an alternative social organization for the benefit of the economic structure, not for the benefit of the people that are participating in it. And I think about, um, if I, you think about all of the structures, the social structures that are built for moms to meet each other, to do things, and whether they're working or not working, there's just a lot. Like even locally in my town, there's a moms club. It's a preschool moms club that's been around since like 1925. There's a board. There's this. That's how I've met all of my friends, through my wife being a hyper social human being and participates in all of it. So I get the benefit of that. But that's not there for dads and men. And then we are stuck trying to do what you did as a kid, Nick, and navigate like, oh, is that or this, or I don't know. And I'm just going to stay home. I'm going to go to work and provide for my family. And then it's a total loss of the complete character. And we see the negativity of that.
But okay, so men heal in community, but we also don't often know how to build it. And I think that sometimes what happens is the more established or longer running ones show models of masculinity that we're not always down for, right? Like where belonging requires a certain level of hardness or a certain level of meanness that like I'm just it ain't for me, doc. Like it's not, like to bring it back to the Department of War thing, like I can't imagine being at work and somebody being like that, right? Like no more fatties, right? Like 'cause that's still a job, right? You know what I mean? It's still that's still their job. That's what they do for a living. And to put certain types of ethos, and you find it that too, like we talked about this before on the show, that there's so many men that put these like fake boundaries on stuff that like that's like almost like a no true Scotsman fallacy, right? Like no real man could let a woman listen to a woman talk about baseball. Like, what are you talking about, bro? It's 2025, but it does
Facts.
bring us back
That's
to
just truth.
it does bring us back to the what I think we were talking about in the first episode of this series of conversations too, is the change in economic access to people and how that creates a challenge of defining yourself and defining what success is or what influence and power is. And what I really would honestly just suggest is that perhaps we start redefining, or at least asking ourselves to do better, right? Like instead of thinking about emotional literacy as soft, like it's a skill, you know what I mean? Like she doesn't need to be with you because you're a provider. She would choose to be with you because you support her, or he or she. It doesn't really matter who you're with. It doesn't matter the gender of your partner. But I'm saying, instead of using a traditional masculinity framework for defining your own value in a relationship, maybe you try to do the work to show up in a way that's more concurrent with what your partner wants nowadays, right? Like as women evolve, or men whatever you're dating, whoever you're with, evolve as we as people evolve. The expression of masculinity has to grow to meet that moment. I don't see how else we do it.
Yeah.
We've got a big topic to still cover. So as we come up on time, Nick, final thoughts on this conversation and this week.
Oh my goodness, I had so many ramblings I wanted to go down. But I do think that you're right. Like, we need to recognize like that that men and women, well, that men need to meet the moment. That men need to really kind of step in and meet the moment of like, hey, if this is what women are asking for, or if this is what we acknowledge as part of a problem related to loneliness or a lack of connection, like, let's step into it. Um, an element that I do want to talk about though is that, oftentimes that women also sometimes desire these dominant kind of previous forms of masculinity and play into it. And that leads to confusion often, sometimes, for men when they hear that these ideas are negative out in dominant culture, or they're hearing about the negative aspects and the critical aspects, especially maybe from some of their feminist friends or women, but then like they're hearing also like they need to live up to it, be the provider, but also be the positive masculinity. And so I think that there's something to kind of dive into there sometime as well. But yeah, so like it's a mess, but I think it's easy enough to step into and acknowledge like, hey, I can step into this with my friends, or I can step into this myself.
I think that's a great place for us to continue on the next one. We'll start there with that kind of balance between the confusion of it all, right? Like, because this is the interesting part about these kind of transitional moments is that you're in both. You're like, a little bit of the left, you're in a little bit of right. There's gonna be people that live for all those things. So we'll bring Nicholas back because he's moving in, as we've determined. Roomies! No.
Roomies.
I love the roomie situation.
You get the groceries this week, Nick. You get the groceries.
We're in a situationship, you guys.
I'm bringing beer. It needs to be beer. All right. So this is the More in Common podcast. I'm Gerren Taylor. That's Keith Richardson, Nicholas Miller, and we'll do this again next week. See you soon.